Oh, welcome everybody to session 21 of Classic Metal Class, now hosted on this new platform, Lighthall. I'm, really glad to have Scott here as an expert, and we've got some significant expertise in the people attending as well. So this is, I think, going to be a really great discussion about rebellion. And this is one of the really key themes people have identified as being part of, you could call it the lifestyle, the lyrics, the mentality of heavy metal. It figures into, for good or for bad, into Dina Weinstein's sociology of heavy metal, the people who tried to clamp down on heavy metal in the 1980s. That's something that they really paid close attention to. So I think there's a lot to explore here, and this is our second thematic episode where we're looking at lyrics specifically. We did one earlier that some of you were here for, on songs that have to do with metal identity. So songs that thematize metal itself. And I think we're going to hit on a few of those as well. So rebellion, not unique to metal. I think you can say that it's an integral part of at least some rock and roll. There was this idea that to get into rock and roll was in a certain way to be rebellious, and it could promote behavior that authorities didn't like. So, and then, metal has a big competitor, I think you can say, in the 1970s in punk, right? All about rebellion. So it's not as if metal has the lock on it, but we're going to be looking at that. And, we're all fans of heavy metal. I think we can all call ourselves metalheads. And is it rebellious? So here's a question to start with before to prime the pump, so to speak. Is being a metalhead by its very nature being rebellious, or are there certain ways of consuming it, participating in it, that are kind of conformist, not rebellious, and then other modes are more rebellious? What all of you think? And Scott, you can go first with this if you want to.
Well, we've talked about this in the past. I always thought that, in our generation, the people, I had a unique case in my school because we didn't have cable. So we didn't have MTV. We didn't have any of that stuff. So me and maybe two other people were into metal. And but the three of us shared something in common, and that was we were kind of the misunderstood, bullied, we fit a certain thing that we identified with metal. Metal understood us, right? Where other forms of music maybe didn't grab us. Maybe it was the intensity, it was the lyric content.
Yeah.
Maybe heavy metal did offer a world, right? So you had the look. If you look at bands like Kiss or Iron Maiden, there was more than just the music. There was being part of something. The Kiss Army.
Yeah.
And was the Kiss Army rebellious? Well, sort of. I mean, being part of the Kiss Army may have been kind of an inspiring thing, that you're part of something, but all of this goes along with not feeling part of maybe high school or maybe the teenage experience. At least, growing up in the 80s, for me, I think it was rebellion in the sense that, well, it was also, I would say, finding your own room, if that makes sense.
This is an interesting. Mark says, I don't think being a metalhead itself, so per se, makes you rebellious, unless you want to consider some more conservative metal listeners as posers. Even some metal musicians hardly come across as rebellious anymore. The time factor. Yeah. So if we're talking about the 1970s and 1980s, when many of us were quite young and impressionable, and like Scott said, angsty high schoolers looking for belonging, that sort of thing. That's one thing. But if you've been listening to the stuff for 40 years and you go and see a band and they're in their 70s and they're putting on a good show, is there any rebelliousness to that anymore. Maybe not, and now that certain bands became part of the visual culture. So like you see all these kids walking around in AC/DC, Metallica, Iron Maiden. I forget which other bands have become quite popular. And you go up to them and you say, "Hey, what would you?" Or Def Leppard is a good example.
Yeah.
You like them? And they're like, "Oh no, it's just a T-shirt." That's a very different kind of commitment. It's no longer in any way connected to rebellion. Ken says metal definitely started as a counterculture, but it certainly isn't all that way today. Yeah, and I wonder if we can say that already in the 1980s, some of it was no longer countercultural. One of the things I was keeping in my back pocket for a little bit later on was when I went to Monsters of Rock, and that was the kicking off of the '88 tour at Alpine Valley. It was Kingdom Come, and everybody wanted them to get off the stage. They weren't really highly regarded. And then it was Metallica, and then it was Dokken, and then it was the Scorpions, and then it was Van Halen. But it was, post David Lee Roth, Van Halen, and people started. Alpine Valley is this beautiful little venue with lots of grass available, and unfortunately they'd recently sodded it, and so people started, they were a little bit bored, they're throwing around beach balls, and then somebody started picking up big chunks of sod and they were throwing it around, and they were throwing it around in kind of a festive way originally. But people were getting like hit with it. It was big chunks, so like, weighing 20 pounds or so. And Sammy Hagar got up there and this is kind of the funny moment. He said, if you don't stop doing that, we're canceling the rest of the concert. We're not going to play. And then all these boos. Oh, this isn't rock and roll. Van Halen, you've sold out. But they did stop. And then Van Halen played their set, which, by the way, did not include much classic Van Halen, David Lee Roth era Van Halen. It was mostly, 5150 and OU 812, and actually almost as many Sammy Hagar songs as classic Van Halen. But that struck me as, as a 17-year-old kid watching this. I was like, that's not really metal, is it? No, so we've got some good responses. Mark says, to take an extreme example, should we classify neo-Nazis who build their identity around black metal rebellious? And I would say yes. And rebellion could be turned in multiple ways, right? Ken said, Ken followed up on that. I suppose if we consider rebellion could be good or bad, then yes, in a bad way. And then, so Rob has also got his finger on something. Don't we have to say something about what a rebellion is a rebellion from, or counterculture too? And so I don't want to dominate the conversation, but let me throw this one to Scott. Rebellion and counterculture. This is a good point made by Rob. These are relative terms, right? You can only be rebellious if you have something to rebel against. So if there's no counter pressure, there's no prevailing culture giving you a hard time, you're not really a rebel then, right?
Well, as far as that goes, it's perspective of the person rebelling, right? So you can have,
okay.
Even take the counterculture thing of high school. So metal was a counterculture, but I could have had it's possible somebody has a perceived vision that they're disliked. They have a perceived, or they have social anxieties. So,
they're projecting out there like dislike that doesn't really exist, or
I'm kind of like going like the neo-Nazi example is a great one. That could be rebellion against people don't think like them. These people. So I guess it's a really interesting point. Is rebellion a rebellion from or a counterculture to? Yeah, counter what? I mean, back to the thing. It would be to. It was a very preppy school. I mean, just because there was no MTV, so everybody's dressed like it was that MTV didn't existed. So I was with my jean jacket and ripped jeans, and my hair was feathered, and I got the mullet eventually. So
me too. Yeah, I think a lot of us did.
And it was more of, I would say for me, it was more of a kind of a safe space, if we want to call it that, or it was a world that understood me. Now, not to abandon what we were saying before, a great point that everybody made here just a couple minutes ago. I do find it hard to take new metal, a lot of new metal that like students might show me, like guys in biker shorts, um, or not, no kind of world or image. And I'm looking, it's like, well, they're technically good players, but there's no world here for me to identify with. You
That's an
know,
interesting way to talk about it. Having to have a community, a world, right?
yeah, I mean that's what metal was. It was, look in the '80s. I just looked up something. I should have sent it to you, Greg. But if you look on YouTube, in '78, Gene Simmons would do album signings, and every one of them, it's like the newscaster's like, I don't want to be here because I just want to make it clear I'm not a Kiss fan. But and then, and he couldn't look any more stuffy in this one. And he goes in, and these kids are going crazy, and Gene Simmons is giving him a hard time. And so it's kind of like, well, there's the clear. If you look at these old videos and old interviews, there's a clear counterculture,
Yeah.
to, Gene Simmons, being, a smart aleck, and, the person going, don't you think this is inappropriate, or don't you think this is going to lead to devil worship, or don't you think, well, of course, I mean, maybe it's a rebellion
Well,
to,
there was a lot of that in the, let's call it, the stuffy culture, right? Misunderstandings of the
yeah,
the genre. And interestingly, too, as has been pointed out, among academics and music critics, metal was more or less dismissed all the way through the 80s, with a few exceptions, like Dina Weinstein, for example, who is a voice crying out in the wilderness. So there's some good discussion going on here, which I think is a great lead into the first song that we are going to look at. Mark says, I obviously wasn't there because Mark is a bit younger than the rest of us. But a common theme in a lot of early British metal band stories is growing up in post-war industrial areas, the socioeconomic circumstances of the 1970s. Does that bear on the rebellious theme, countering these limitations? And yeah, I mean, I remember reading some interesting interviews with John Gallagher, Raven. And, Raven was always kind of a great but second tier new wave of British heavy metal band, and he talks about being poor and going to junkyards and scrounging parts that they could use to make speakers and amps and things like that, and it's kind of like the punk DIY thing, right? You'd get whatever you can get your hands on, but a lot of it had to do, I think, with scarcity. You do see that with a lot of these bands. The famous story about Rat and Motley Crue having to share an apartment all together in the lean years before they made it big on the Sunset Strip. And then Ken says, I think that was centrally important. Early 1980s UK was quite conservative in many ways. So the Sex Pistols, Sabbath, Priest and Maiden were seen as a dangerous trend that could corrupt the youth at the time. So let's take up the first song that I put into our playlist, Breaking the Law. I mean, that is a song of rebellion, but it's a certain kind of rebellion, right? You look at the lyrics, and it is post-industrial society. There's no place for the guy, right? And it's got a great video as well from the early years of MTV with a band robbing a bank at Guitar Point,
at
and then
Guitar Point.
zooming off in their car, Um, and it's got this anthemic chorus, and I think a lot of the songs of rebellion are often anthems, aren't they?
Yeah.
So breaking the law, breaking the law. I mean, I remember my kids hearing it and getting into it, and then wandering around the house talking about breaking the law. And so, what are these verses about? Well, I mean, look at the lyrics, right? He's alienated. He's got anger in his heart. He might as well put some action in his life because his life sucks. And the motivation seems to be, having been let down, there's no place for me, so I'm going to make a place for me. So rebellion is a way of carving out a a spot for himself. And there's this great line that's a bridge point. You don't know what it's like.
Yeah.
That I think is kind of a wail that all of us probably said back then. We're rebellious because you don't know what it's like for us.
Oh God, yeah.
That track?
I agree. And look, I'm sure everybody remembers this, but we do need to point out this is before you can go join a social media world and scroll. And when you went home, you were in the basement with your records, man. And
unless you had somebody hanging out with you down there.
Well, but usually anybody hanging out with me, somebody bring over the new David Lee Roth record, or and it would be cranking loud, and so we weren't absorbed into a social media thing. We were absorbed into the records, and once you leave school, once you're in the basement, you have no clue what anybody else is doing. You know how you're going to cope. That's why that you nailed it with that. You don't know what it's like kind of mentality, where it's like, misunderstood, or not understood.
Yeah. And so therefore rebelling against that, right? Mark says breaking the law is also kind of archetypical, I feel, being down and out, needing to do some less than reputable things just to get by, feeling like giving a finger to anyone who wants to take your slice away. So yeah, you could say it's an economic song of the downtrodden, right? Instead of just saying, well, I guess I'll work my 9 to 5 and that's going to suck. I can't even get a 9 to 5. I have to move from town to town,
I guess now we're talking about who beyond it, who would identify with this tune. I think that's what Mark's saying. It's not.
That's where it gets really interesting, right? Because, and this goes to some of the points that were being made a little bit earlier about you can turn rebellion in different ways. I think there were a lot of people who were like, I just like to break laws. This is a great song. I like to vandalize. I like to steal. I had some buddies that would actually break into trains and steal stuff from them. And most of the time it wasn't anything useful that they could sell,
Right.
But they loved doing it. And I think it was part of the thrill of having to outwit the railroad cops and getting over on somebody.
Right.
Yeah. Now Ken has a good thing here about Iron Maiden. We're gonna talk about Running Free in just a bit. The Maiden album Killers from '81. If everybody's probably seen this, that's the one where the Eddie has the axe, right?
Yep.
And he looks a little bit more put together than the Eddie from the original Iron Maiden album. The arms of the person Eddie is just axe feature the sleeves and cuff of a woman's blouse. The style of blouse is very popular at the time with none other than then President Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. The original album cover by Derek Riggs allegedly showed who it was that the Eddie was in the process of killing, but it was changed as the band felt the album could be banned. And that touches on something we're going to get into in a bit as well. The counter response from the prevailing culture. We're not going to let you do this sort of stuff. And that's actually a good lead into the second song, We're Not Going to Take It by Twisted Sister. And there's two versions of the video, right? There's a version where it's just the kid in his bedroom, and he's listening to a Twisted Sister song. He's got a guitar. He's kind of air strumming along with it. And then there's this longer one that's got like a 2-minute vignette with this guy. I don't know who the actor was, but he's actually quite good, being this prick dad who fought in Vietnam, didn't come back here to have his son listening to this crap. He gets excused from the table. He goes upstairs, right? And then there's all this stuff for like twist. He asks his son. He goes into this tirade, and he's like, what do you want? And then the kid gets to finally talk, and he says, I want to rock, which is the Twisted Sister song that's playing. And he strums the guitar, and the dad gets blown out the window. And then Twisted Sister appears, and you could say Judas Priest and Breaking the Law. Okay, they look like ruffians, right?
Yeah.
Twisted Sister is a whole different level. You got the drag, the makeup, the crazy hair on D. Snyder. Right? Imagine somebody like that breaking into your place, right? And it's like a fever dream that we as kids could look at and be like, yeah, that would be awesome, right? And in a way, this is more generic than in terms of rebellion than breaking the law, because it's got this chorus, we're not going to take it, oh, we're not going to take it, we're not going to take it anymore. What aren't they going to take? Well, I mean, the lyrics tell us some of the things. This is our life, we're going to fight the powers, don't pick our destiny. Okay, I want to decide for myself. You're so condescending, your gall is never ending, we don't want anything from you. If that's your best won't do it, because we're rejecting the prevailing culture. But when he was asked about this in an interview at one time, Dee Snider actually said, it can be about anything. And this is actually from this great book by Robert Walzer, Running with the Devil, Power, Gender, and Madness in Heavy Metal Music. He says, as Dee Snider of Twisted Sister says of the song, it's very general. We weren't specific about just what it is we aren't taking, work, school, whatever, so you can apply it to whatever you want. Now, is that kind of a smart move on their part, lyrically speaking, to make it so open? What do you think?
I think, absolutely, because I mean, even at the time, the only parts I could recite of the song, even though I heard it a million times, is the chorus and the bridge. We'll fight, we're right, you'll see, right?
Yeah.
But like the verses are kind of like, that wasn't the part I responded to. So, I mean, it was, it was at a time when it was starting to get, this culture was coming out. It was like you said, it's being, panned by anybody that in the art, in the art section of any paper they're getting. And then, it was the beginning, and like I've always said, of all the movies, like Footloose and Breakfast Club and all these things that were the teens against the parents. And that was really kind of the theme. And,
yeah.
And yeah,
that's interesting, because the kids in Footloose, for example, and maybe a couple other of those movies, if they weren't in such a completely repressive town, they would be the high school kids who were being jerks to the punks and new wavers and heavy metal people, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was ultra repressive, right?
Yeah. So I mean, this shows what would we call it, the relativity of rebellion.
Yeah.
Some kid in a pickup truck, and who wants to dance in his jeans and button down shirt, in, where was it that he was dancing in some
Risky
barn?
Business.
No, I'm thinking in Footloose, he was dancing in some barn, right?
Oh, Kevin Bacon.
Yeah. I mean, he's not the guy who's going to be showing up to a Twisted Sister concert.
But like, I mean, I guess the town was almost hyperbolic in how stiff it was.
Yeah.
So it was really supposed to, we would go there, and then of course, Mr. Roboto comes out about the same thing, right? Kilroy was
true,
record,
yeah.
Which tanked, but was like, going on the backs of the.
It was a cool record, that's for sure. Right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that tanked that we did respond to. Now, Mark has two points here. So from a songwriting perspective, We're Not Going to Take It is great. Its lack of specificity makes it an anthem. You can carry it all over the world. It can mean whatever it needs to for the audience. So you can fill it with whatever specific content. And then about like the Footloose thing, Mark says, but does that make rebellion a mainstream theme? Is that recuperation, I think is the term. And we might think about like the Breakfast Club as an example of that too, right? It's like, well, you got your jock, you got your
right
prom queen girl, you got your burnout, you got your nerd, and then whatever Ali Sheedy was supposed to be, the weird girl, or
she was the
proto goth.
yeah totally goth. We didn't call it that back then, did we?
No. Yeah, so I think that's quite true. And I mean, we did see movies coming out as well that sometimes heavy metal figured into, like horror movies. One of the key themes is the adults don't believe the teenagers about the terrible danger, like in Nightmare on Elm Street, which, you know, eventually by number 3 is going to have a Dawkins song in there, Dream Warriors.
It's my favorite one.
Yeah. What else? There was that one that had Fastway did the soundtrack to it, and it had Ozzy Osbourne and Gene Simmons in it. I forget what that was called. And Ozzy Osbourne, interestingly, plays a very stuffy preacher type, right?
That's right.
Now, here's an interesting point Ken makes. Maybe there's a distinction to be made between authentic rebellion and presentational rebellion that's actually an act put on for purposes of popularity. And, you know, you could look at Twisted Sister's approach and say, where do they fit in? Are they genuine rebellion? Are they presentational? And I think that's the sort of thing that has to be borne out by looking at like the larger matrix. If you just put together a band and you put them up on stage and you give them like rebellious names, like this guy is, you know, axe murderer, and this guy over here is I don't know, puppy kicker or something.
Or my favorite, William Murderface.
Oh, right, from the band Death Clock. Yeah, William. It's William Murderface, isn't it? You've got. Yeah, I mean, Death Clock. So, I mean, this is totally off topic, but Death Clock is kind of a interesting thing for this because they're always worried about whether they're really metal or not.
Right.
You know.
Well, you know, I don't want to jump off this point yet because Ken has a great point. You know, I always point to, you know, Kiss is supposed to be the ultimate party band, you know, and he had, you know, the rant about we like cold gin. Well, they don't drink, you know, like, you know, they weren't partiers themselves. I mean, you know, they weren't drug or alcohol users, or they all, but, you know, they always talk about, you know, in his rants, does everybody like to get high, you know, and
yeah.
I guess in the 70s you wouldn't know that. Later it came out that they didn't drink or do drugs. You
know, it's funny too with Kiss, because I just read this yesterday. The song Virgin Killer, which got the Scorpions in a lot of trouble, and you know, the album cover got banned and stuff like that. They made that up as a spoof of Kiss. They were touring with Kiss, and I forget exactly who it was. I think it might have. It wasn't. Maybe it was Uli von Roth, but one of them came in the back room and he's like, you know, messing around, and you know, he made up that song Virgin Killer is supposed to be a parody of Kiss songs, because Kiss songs are so over the top, right?
Oh yeah.
And then it takes on a life of its own, you know, and it gets attributed to the Scorpions as if, you know, it's like their shtick. Now, Mark says something interesting about Death Clock here. Death Clock presents a world where being a metalhead is rebellious, it's economics, and it is like herd behavior too. Death Clock is like the most important band in the world. People will engage in all sorts of crazy behaviors to get to see them. You have a cabal of people that are worried if Death Clock's album doesn't drop, the economy is going to go down. But they haven't sold out as a result. And it is interesting because the most important character is not these clownish guys in Death Clock. It's their manager / attorney. I forget his name, but you realize that he's the real thing behind Death Clock, and he's not rebellious at all. He's very straight-laced. He's always like, all right, guys, now it's time for us to get to recording. Quit fucking around. You know? So, Ken says, I think that there's the Death Clock are self-aware to some extent, or even a little bit of self-parody. Yeah, I mean, there may be, I'd have to go back and look at the episodes. I recently watched my way through the entire thing, except for the final episode, which I've been saving because it's 45 minutes long and a rock opera. I think there, I mean, among some of them, I guess Nathan Explosion sometimes realizes that he's he's being kind of silly. I would say that Pickles is probably the most self-aware of the group. That's my view. I mean, William Murderface has a lot of like whining and stuff like that because he's the proverbial bassist and doesn't get like the billing that everybody else does except for Toki. But it's mostly off base, whereas Pickles seems to be a little bit more grounded, even though he's like high all the time.
Right. Yeah, I got to go back and watch those. It's been a while.
I think we need to do an episode on Death Clock as a metal band eventually.
I mean, yeah. I mean, the funny thing is metalheads love the show.
Well, I wonder too who else really likes the show.
Well, that's interesting. I'd like to know the demographic it ended up with.
We'll have to do some research on that.
Yeah.
I think. So going on, one other song that we definitely wanted to hit on, I mentioned this before, Running Free. Now, Running Free is a little bit different, right? It's not breaking the law. We're going to break the law because you jerks won't give me a job. It's not just a generic, we're not going to take it. It's more, this is what it's like to be a kid, just 16, a pickup truck. I mean, he is out of money and out of luck, has nowhere to call his own. So what is the response? Hit the gas, here I go. And then it's this, anthemic, I'm running free, right? And he winds up in an LA jail. They don't have anything, so he gets out. Then he goes to a club, picks up a woman at the bottle top, whiskey dancing disco hop, and then somehow screws things up because now all the boys are after me, right? So he's gone into a place where he doesn't really belong, perhaps, and he's breaking the norms there. And that's it. That's all there is to the song. But that song, it really does seem like a song of rebellion, doesn't it? It was something we could relate to so easily as kids, even if we were like holding down jobs and lived in a house and went to school and that sort of thing.
Well, I think that could be part of it too. If somebody feels, trapped in their suburban life, how many times do you see hear adults say, I just want to get out. I just want to go away. I just want to go away. So it doesn't have to be like, too literal. It could be anybody that feels trapped. Although, I think there's different reasons or levels of that, but like even the first bit of the lyrics is definitely, there's nothing for here, got no place to call my own.
Yeah. It's interesting that they locate it in a different continent, right? It's Iron Maiden singing this, putting it together in London, but it's in LA.
It's in LA, right?
And this is 1980. This is not like, heavy metal has exploded in LA yet at this time.
Yeah.
Kind of curious because we have Ken here, who came up in the new wave of British heavy metal. That song must have had a significant impact. It was a single, and then I forget what was on the other side of it, but it must have gotten quite a bit of play. It's a short song. It's it's easy to, they weren't getting a ton of radio play, but it must have gotten a lot of people responding to it.
Well, I think back then, weren't they, they were still driving around in a station wagon with, with records out of
right.
records out of the back of their truck, the car.
Yeah. Well, I think once that first album dropped, there was already significant buzz about Iron Maiden because of the Soundhouse tapes, which are what you're talking about there. And it is, we're starting to get into the weeds a bit with this, but one of the things we can talk about with Iron Maiden is in terms of vocalists, like what happens when you go from Paul Di'Anno to Bruce Dickinson, who does a great version of Running Free. But there's some things where Paul Di'Anno, maybe he doesn't have the pipes and the chops that Bruce Dickinson did, but for Running Free, I think he did. I think that's a great song for him.
He was much more of a, Bruce Dickinson's always, been a together person, as far as, he's a pilot. He
Right,
does
right.
routine, he's in shape, they play soccer, but Paul Di'Anno was a true mess up, and he might have been a better person to deliver those lyrics,
As
from
a
a
as a broken, fractured person.
and
Yeah.
then you relate. I mean, this is ethos, right? You look at someone and go, that guy's like me, and he's singing about me, and then um,
Mm.
which is a whole other topic,
Yeah. So Ken says, Maiden were going from pub to pub playing gigs on stages made of broke up packing crates, beer flying everywhere, great times. Interestingly, I don't remember Running Free making that much of a
Oh,
splash. And
interesting.
then Mark says, Bruce does not have the character for the theme, though. You can buy Paul singing that. I
Yeah,
don't know. What do you think that's right, Scott? When like so think about Bruce Dickinson singing Running Free on Live After Death.
yeah, I
Um,
didn't even. Yeah, I mean, though, even before, like, Live After Death is the first Maiden album I got, because I was looking for this song I heard on a metal show once, and of course it was The Trooper. I didn't know it was The Trooper.
okay, yeah.
And my friend had the tape, and I went, they were all going to the beach, and instead of going to the beach, because we were on Cape Cod, I was going through his Maiden tapes till I found that song. And I found it was track 3, right? On so I found The Trooper, and then I was preoccupied with getting that album. And
Okay.
so I wore that album out, but the stuff that turned out to be Di'Anno stuff was my least favorite on the album at the time.
Interesting. Even like
So
Phantom of the Opera, which Bruce has the
no, actually, I did love Phantom of the
okay.
Opera. Right? Yeah, yeah, you're right about that
Yeah,
one.
I mean, again, we're going into the weeds a little bit, but like one song that I would think classic Maiden stuff that Di'Anno is better on than Dickinson is Wrathchild. What do you
So,
think?
what did you say about Dickinson and Wrathchild?
Yeah, the song Wrathchild.
Yeah,
Di'Anno's the original singer.
right.
Dickinson has sung it probably more times in his life because it's a standard. But I think I kind of prefer Di'Anno on that one.
Yeah, and I agree with what Mark is saying. That's sorry, I was reading what Mark's, and it's the lyrics are different. It's true, and
Yeah.
when I watched the Live at the Rainbow, I'm sure everybody here has seen Live at the Rainbow. I'm totally convinced. I think that's just an amazing show. It fires me up.
Mm.
Di'Anno's a mess, and I love it. And you know, and the rhythm section was on fire. Like you and I always say, they're a little more punk then.
Yeah.
And I think that has to do with their members. So when Mark says Bruce went to a preppy school and it's clear in his lyrics, yeah, I mean, I love Bruce Dickinson and his stuff, but it's kind of like, I would say it's definitely has to do with more rebellion in the Di'Anno era than it does with the Dickinson era.
Yeah. Interestingly, it was Ken who suggested "The Prisoner" is a song of rebellion because
Oh,
I did a thing
you're
on
right.
social media, and I think that actually does fit. Um, the lead-in from the show "The Prisoner." There's sort of a generic thing, sort of like the Twisted Sister, right? I'm not going to be pushed down by you people, and
I'm not a
then
number. I'm a free
yeah,
man.
yeah. So I think that kind of fits. One of the things that Scott and I, as we were preparing for this, did is kick around some of the suggestions that people had made, and then say, well, they're actually probably not rebellion. There's something else that's closely related. And so one of the ones that came up a lot was Black Sabbath's War Pigs. And then Scott and I started thinking, and we said, nah, it's not actually rebellion. And we'll talk about why. But then we started looking at the Black Sabbath catalog. I don't actually think that there's a lot of straight out rebellion songs in there, although they are to be into Black Sabbath was kind of to be rebellious, right? In a way.
Well, that's what you and I had trouble with. We're thinking, yeah, Black Sabbath, let's go there. But I kept going, no,
Yeah.
no. But
So
yeah,
so Ken points out, isn't War Pigs an anti-Vietnam song? Yeah, it is. But that's not enough to make it rebellion. It's like totally criticism of the military industrial complex. Actually, kind of cool, sophisticated ways of doing that. There's condemnation. there's a divine judgment that takes place, but there's no action on the part of the singer or anybody other than God and the devil that is doing anything. So it definitely is. So like Rob says, protest versus rebellion. It's definitely a protest and a social criticism song. But I think in order to have rebellion, there's got to be activity, agency, doing something. And maybe that's part of what's missing in a lot of the Black Sabbath songs where they are criticizing the culture and
Well,
horrible things.
if it was a rebellion song, it would probably be sung in first person, where it's a soldier and they're going to escape from this because they think it's wrong, and they're going to do something against the government. I think if they turned it that way, it's how it's spoken about, right?
So Rob asks, is speaking truth to power a form of rebellion, or does it have to be something other than speech? That's a good question. I don't think that just criticizing is actually rebellion, unless you're in a situation in which that's going to get you locked up. And nobody was about to lock up Black Sabbath for war pigs.
Isn't rebellion require action, or
no, I think Rob's got a good point. If you're in a totalitarian society, like the act of, so if Black Sabbath had gone behind the Iron Curtain, and one of the things we're going to talk about a little bit later is they had these lists of bands that were forbidden in the Soviet Union, right?
Oh, God,
which included UFO, for example. They were pretty extensive. So to do that behind the Iron Curtain, or to go to Iran during the Iranian Revolution, if Black Sabbath had played there, they're playing, I don't know, they wouldn't have been war pigs, it would have been something else. That would have been an act of rebellion. I don't think that playing it in the United States or in the UK at the time, or France, or other parts of the world that were more free, it's protest, but I don't see it as rebellion myself. Now Ken says, I don't think Black Sabbath ever did actual rebellion. Even things like Fairies Wear Boots is criticism. Yeah, Fairies Wear Boots is kind of interesting because you do have a character there, right? And he's getting a hard time from an older guy. You dirty hippies, kind of thing. Mark says, critiquing what we suffer as championing what we do. Passivity versus activity. Would activity be rebellion? I think there's something there. Yeah, I think that now we're not going to take it. It's an active thing, breaking the law, running free. These are action oriented, even though you don't know what the hell the action is. Like running free and doing what? Well, driving around in my pickup truck.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Partying. So Rob says that also makes me wonder about whether one needs something like a coherent account of what one is doing in order to engage in rebellion. I think that's important. And I think that there's some songs that mention rebellion or being a rebel, but they don't offer enough content for it. So anyway, it's the Black Sabbath, another one that we thought of, Disturbing the Priest, right? Off of the Born Again album, because you're actively disturbing the priest. But it's not really about that. The chorus is, we're disturbing the priest. And it's actually based in, apparently they were disturbing a vicar when they were recording their album out there in 1983. But it's really about a struggle between the religious figure of the priest and the devil. And the narrator just wants to be free of both. So he says the devil and the priest can't exist if one goes away. It's like the battle of the sun and moon and night and day. And then he says, watch out for religion when he, the devil, gets too near. So it's not really a rebellion song. It's more of an escape song, right?
Yeah. And I just want to say that, there's some good points here. Here's the thing about, we're not going to take it, for example.
Yeah.
They don't have to put the point of these songs that we're talking about. Some of them are kind of vague, right? And don't you need something to depart from? Well, that's what the listener inputs. That's what the listener fills. the listener, we're not going to take it. It's like, I'm misunderstood. Well, that's enough for me to go, yeah, well, my teacher, keeps, doing this, or my parents keep grounding me. And then you take, we're not going to take it to your specific situation. I think it works in songs.
And the video content helps to give you exactly what they're talking about. We're not going to take it as about oppressive parents,
which was a common thing because, yeah, with MTV coming out, I guess, and
yeah,
it was kind of like you're watching this stuff, and then all the talk shows like Phil Donahue, kids are watching. Can you believe it? So
yeah. So Rob says to be an act of rebellion, it doesn't have to be coherent or even aimed in a particular direction. I mean, I think it kind of helps to have specificity, but it if you want to have like a big song, like we're not going to take it, you don't want it too specific. Like Scott said, you can kind of ignore the verses and just focus on the chorus, right? So yeah. Now Ken says I would posit protest becomes rebellion at the point where passivity becomes activity, and I think that there's something there too. Another song that we considered, Triumph, Fight the Good Fight. Beautiful song. It's an anthem, right? I think we all know the chorus. Knowing the other lyrics, maybe not so much. It's very inspirational, but it's not really rebellion. It's about rejecting the wrong perspectives. You think a little more money will buy your soul some rest. There's also solidarity. Keep up your spirit, keep up your faith. I'm counting on you. You know what you've got to do. So it sounds rebellious, but it's really more about like how to get by in a crappy situation where you're going to be challenged.
It's even more encouraging than rebelling, right? It's more
That's
of an
a good way to put
encouraging.
it,
Yeah.
Inspiring I mean,
Right.
now could it be turned to the purposes of rebellion? Maybe. You're up against some pretty bad people, and now you play Triumph's Fight the Good Fight every moment. It could be part of a rebellion, but I don't think it's rebellious itself.
Right.
Another one that goes back to this thing about so Rob, it doesn't have to be coherent or even aimed in a particular direction. Wasp has a song called Rebel in the FDG, which means effing degenerate generation, right? It's just a hot mess of a song. I love it musically. Lyrically, it's garbage, quite frankly. So I don't think it's a rebellion song. And even if it was, I'm a rebel in the generation of degenerates. So I'm a rebel against rebels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. They got to their meeting room table and said, okay, now we need to rebel against the rebellious.
Well, and that album, interestingly, that's when Wasp abandoned the stage show with like the chainsaws and flames, and they pared down, and you can see interviews with Blackie Lawless where he's like, yeah, we wanted this to be a lot more political. We don't want to distract from our message. And there's stuff about Ronald Reagan, the neutron bomber, and things along those lines in there. Mark says, I don't listen to nobody's rules, not even my own. Yeah. Another one that we looked at that was kind of similar. Motley Crue's Public Enemy #1. Public Enemy #1, but it's not a rebellion song because he's just
title.
Exactly. It'd make you think it is, but it's just about, do you know what it's like to be wanted, being under the gun, being young? And then it just says, I'm Public Enemy #1 over and over again without any proof provided, and anybody can come along and say, I'm a rebel, I'm Public Enemy #1. Another great example of this is Van Halen's Atomic Punk, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's a victim of the science age, child of the storm. He's a ruler of the nether worlds. Nobody rules these streets at night like me, the Atomic Punk. That's all cool, and it's a great song, and it's fun to imagine, but he's not rebelling against anything. He's actually kind of running the show. Mark says there's there's been a distinction so far between rebellion as framed in new wave of British heavy metal songs versus US glam. Would you say that bears out further? Well, so that's actually a good segue into another glam band from LA, Lizzie Borden. Me Against the World, I would say that is a preeminent song of rebellion, right? It starts out, it's just me against the world, and the bridge before the chorus is, I am for real, you don't know what I feel, my strength is in my will, I can't wait, I won't be second rate, in for the kill. And then it's me against the world, me against the world, right? Just being repeated over and over again. And it's pretty generic. It's not saying what he's rebelling against, but it's pretty clear that he is, setting himself against the world. So
rebellion has to be an act. You can feel isolated and misunderstood, but unless you're taking action, there's actually no rebellion. So as the means to feel isolated or misunderstood, but just wallowing in that is definitely not rebellion.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of kind of defiant language in it. If I'm an outcast, I'm not the last, I'm going to have my say, they'll never take me alive, I'm going to make them all pay. Those are,
well, yeah,
but you're right, I'll make them pay. It's not I'm making them pay.
Right.
Anybody can say that they're going to do that, right?
Right.
So I think we have to think about what actually really goes into or constitutes rebellion. We talked a little bit about agency. And you also have to have opposition. You can't be a rebel without something to rebel against. But so, I guess you could say it's relative to what you're rebelling against. Some sort of stronger, earlier power or authority or order, or you could be against imposition of a new force that's taking away things that you've enjoyed before. So there's that. And I kind of think, now I'm curious to what everyone has to say about this. Can you be a rebel entirely on your own, or does it have to at least implicitly involve a larger identity or solidarity? So, I mean, you can use me language, but if we can identify with it, then there's a we there, right? It's us. It's not me against the world. It's us against the world. That seems to be important. What do you think?
I mean, you could be a rebel. It doesn't have to be a we. I mean, we would be, well, there's a different word for that. Well, what would you say if a bunch of us were rebelling? That would be like a cause more so, or
then it attains a kind of the status of like a movement, right?
A movement. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
So Ken says it's absolutely possible to rebel as an individual. I would say, for example, Soviet dissidents. Rob asked, was Socrates a rebel? I mean, I'm not saying that in the lyrics they're using we. I'm saying that insofar as the song could get picked up and used as a way of identifying it, there's sort of an implicit we involved.
Well, in metal, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because this is the group that understands you.
Yeah.
Metalheads, I don't know about anybody else, but in my school, we found each other. And there's an unspoken,
I was just thinking, where you usually found each other, the smoking area.
When I was in high school, it was like the last year they had a smoking lounge.
Okay.
They're like doing away with the smoking lounge. Which is funny because once they went away, but he's like, they had a smoking lounge. Yeah, the schools used to have them.
Yeah, we used to. This is totally off topic, but when I was in college here in Wisconsin, you could smoke in public buildings, and so you couldn't smoke in class. But as soon as class ended, all the smokers would light up in the classroom, including the professor, and then like the classroom would just fill with smoke. There were some buildings that were off limits, like the science building. You couldn't smoke in because you're going to screw things up. But the humanities building was awful for the non-smokers. And then they passed this law, and it was really funny because want to talk about rebellion. So smokers are kind of belly achers, you're taking away our rights and all that. And they don't care about anybody else's rights to like not get,
Not
not
inhale.
stink,
Yeah.
yeah. So they passed this law, and then, the school said, okay, no more smoking in any of the buildings on campus. You have to go outside. And we're like, oh, this is terrible, and within like 3 days, suddenly this haze that was always there in Old Main disappeared. It dissipated. And we're like, holy crap, you can like really see in here. And then we started thinking, wow, it must have really been awful for the non-smokers. So Ken says being a metal fan in the early days definitely involved a sense of belonging to the metalhead community. And I think that now it's still true today. Yeah, but I think it's kind of changed. It's kind of morphed, right? And Mark says, by the sheer fact the singer sings to an audience, you could argue the singer sings about rebellion with the intent of connecting. That's interesting. Yeah, if you sing about your crappy life and who you don't like because they're like putting their boot on you, are you like automatically reaching other people? Yeah.
Well, I can't think of any. Well, it's funny we're talking about this era because the metal, and of course that we've talked about, there's 500 subcategories, but I don't hear anybody talking about rebellion. I don't hear anybody.
You mean in lyrics or
in lyrics? That's what I mean. Yeah, like the students will bring stuff in all the time, and it's a lot of dream sequence stuff, right? Or
okay.
Fantasy, I should say.
Yeah.
But it's not the. I don't hear people chanting anything. I don't know. It was. I think like what you said. Who said it? That in the early days it was definitely a unified. Mark said like in the early days of metal there was
Ken.
definitely.
It was Ken.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Ken. I apologize. I can't see, so I can't see the. So I think in the early days, I always go back to you go to the mall. We used to tell parents, we're going to go see a movie, but we just walk around the mall in circles. But you would walk by somebody with a Triumph patch on their jacket, and you go, "Hey, man, yeah, dude, you going to see them when they come here?" And instantly. You were, you didn't have to introduce each other.
It's funny. I was at Summerfest a couple weeks ago to see. We were there for like a new wave night, so we saw Howard Jones and Modern English and a couple other bands. And we were walking around, and I had my Saxon shirt on, and I mean, I don't have any band shirts for bands like Modern English. All I have is metal stuff. And so a guy came up to me, and he's like, he was clearly like super drunk, and he's like, he wanted a fist bump, and I was like, okay,
yeah.
And then he's like, Saxon, man, I love them. What's your favorite album? And he's starting up a conversation with me. And it's funny too, because the guy did not know that Saxon is still around, still touring, still putting out new albums, and his mind was blown by that sort of. But seeing the logo was enough to kind of do it for him. Rob says, "Oh, this is good. Yesterday I was walking around the park with a metal T-shirt. Some kid on a skateboard flashed me the devil horns. So there is hope for a new generation, right? That's kind of excellent to read."
That's awesome. It really interesting thing about the
praise
unity.
Dio, Ken says.
What? I can't
praise
see.
Dio.
Praise. Yes.
What were you saying, Scott?
Gosh. Oh yeah. So on this whole thing about rebellion and togetherness and kind of the culture, Steve Harris tells a story that on one of the tours Steve Harris is a big Journey fan.
Yeah.
And he said we would play Journey in our PA music, like 4 or 5 songs, and the crowd would start booing it. And interesting, kind of think about it. You're, with your bunch of metalheads and stuff, and wait, this isn't our people, this isn't our music, this isn't our, and to get actually angry that Journey's being played. And I told you when Wasted opened, when they came out with that really kind of almost Survivor like pop record. They opened for Maiden on the Somewhere in Time tour that I saw, and everybody was booing them. And of course, that made Steve Harris angry.
Yeah.
Because his hero's up there.
Love Hate got booed off stage when I saw Iron Maiden in Madison, like 91 or 90. They got to play 5 songs and everyone was like, get the hell out of here. We're here to hear Maiden, So
it's a tight-knit community.
That's true. And it's interesting because I guess it kind of shows you that like there's like the being rebellious, and we look at these people kind of romantically like, oh, they must be very open and stuff like that. Well, not necessarily. Maybe the rebellion can be very directed, and everything outside of that, screw them,
Or here's your room that you wouldn't let me in. So we've created our own and you're not allowed in ours. I don't know. I mean,
I think that happens. So rebellion can be rebellion against like hierarchy, and then new hierarchies can get very easily established, right? And if we think about going back to like what is rebellion, there's a number of different values or themes that it could be organized around. One of the most abstract is the music itself, the right to rock, and that's what we're not going to take it is about in given the video, right? It could be hedonism. We're going to party a lot, and that's how we rebel. We get drunk and high. We screw. We break stuff. We dance. That could be part of it.
The Keel album, The Right to Rock? Wasn't that the album that Gene Simmons produced? Right.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, Simmons did a lot of stuff in the background. Him and Dio. A lot of stuff in LA with different bands.
Well, and Gene Simmons was kind of at the beginning of Van Halen, right?
He was the one who got them to produce their first demo.
Yeah.
That's pretty big. And their demo wasn't like 3 tracks. It was like 20 tracks. So,
yeah.
What else? I mean, lifestyle. You're not going to keep me from wearing my denim and leather. You're not going to get me to cut my long hair. That could be part of rebellion. Being against parental or educational or political authority, criminality, law breaking, fighting, aggression, that sort of stuff. And I suppose you could even say that like referencing some fantasy stuff or the occult or Satanism, because a lot of bands referenced Satan without being Satan worshipers. They say, well, it's a way for me to stick it to the authorities. I think all of those are themes that show up. Going back to the Maiden thing, Ken says, ironically, some people complain about Maiden using the UFO song as their concert intro track, being oblivious as to who UFO were. Yeah, I mean, so Lights Out, right, is I think the track in question. And it's interesting when you look at, this is a whole different topic, influence, right? People are like, oh, Black Sabbath, the most influential metal band. Yeah, they were, except that on Iron Maiden, arguably a massively influential band, you ask them who their heroes were, and Bruce Dickinson doesn't say Geezer Butler, he says Pete Way, and then
or Steve Harris.
Steve Harris, yeah. Bruce Dickinson says Ian Gillan. That was the person he wanted to be, not Ozzy. I mean, who the hell would want to be Ozzy, right?
Well, Lights Out in London, that's such a rocking tune. It's burning.
Oh, yeah.
That's a great tune, and I didn't realize that people didn't like it. They're using it right before they go on stage. You mean?
Exactly the way that Judas Priest uses Black Sabbath's War Pigs. It's become a popular thing for bands these days to like have a intro track that's the same everywhere, I think.
Yep.
So, well, let's talk about a few more songs. We've really like run through the time quickly. Except I'm a Rebel. Is that a rebellion song? I mean, it certainly seems so, right?
It's in the title for starters.
And interestingly, that wasn't originally by Accept. It was an AC/DC song that Accept took and then did essentially a cover of. it's kind of generic. I'm a rebel. Don't you know it? They're all laughing at me. They say I'm a danger to the public. I'm just the product of a screwed up world. There's not an awful lot of content there. So I don't know about that one, but it's at least got rebel in its name, as does Queensryche Chemical Youth. We Are
Chemical Youth.
Rebellion, right? Which is hard. It's hard to make out the lyrics on that one when you listen to it. I listened to it just the other day, and when they were asked about it, here we go. Chris DeGarno said, this was about 20th century youth living in the atomic age. It was also a play on the technological, ecological aspect of the day we were living in at the time. It's a song about feeling rebellious. I don't know if there was really a general theme to it. It was more of a hodgepodge of all these little sentences that made up a modern day picture. Now, when you hear that,
Yeah.
even though it's mentioning rebellion, I don't know that it's a rebellion song. Ken says, not sure about Accept. German thrash came from a distinctly different origin than U.S. thrash. I mean, one of the songs that does come up that we should talk about as a rebellion song with Accept is later. I mean, I'm a Rebel is the title of their second album. And this one is the title of an album, Balls to the Wall. That's a rebellion song, it's so the bridge part is, watch the damned, they're going to break their chains, you can't stop them, they're coming to get you, and then you'll get your balls to the wall. Who's getting their balls to the wall? The oppressors, those who keep other people in chains. Too many slaves in this world die by torture and pain. Too many people do not see they're killing themselves, going insane. Too many people do not know bondage is over the whole human race. They believe slaves always lose and this fear keeps them down. So he's saying, let's not let the fear keep us down. Because then, in the bridge part, come on, man, let's stand up all over the world. Let's plug a bomb in everyone's ass. Okay, that's pretty rebellious, right? If they don't keep us alive, we're going to fight for our right. Build a wall with the bodies of the dead, and you're saved. Make the world scared. Come on, show me the sign of victory. Now, if you've ever been to an Accept or an Udo concert, at that moment when they're playing that song, because they never don't play Balls to the Wall, like the whole place is erupting. You've got that, everybody singing together, da 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 da. You're right. That one is definitely a rebellion song. So maybe I'm a Rebel, not so much Balls to the Wall. Clearly, whatever you want to say. Is it about the proletariat? Is it about, the average person? Is it about the people who've been shut out? It's sort of like, if you took Breaking the Law and then you blew it up into a giant we, right?
Yeah, right. Well, that's where it comes to it becomes a movement or a cause or a whatever. We're all involved.
There's another song that my wife and I use as a joke off the same album, which is not a rebellion song and is one that sort of like reinforces hierarchy, Losers and Winners, right? Like whenever my wife Andy complains about something, not always, but often I'll say, write a letter, you'll feel better. Writing a letter is not an act of rebellion generally, right? It's right. And he's made in the song, Accept, are making fun of the people who write letters because they're impotent, So just
right, you'll feel better, right? Yeah, right.
Yeah, same album, So here's another one that we should talk about. What about Queensryche's Revolution Calling? A revolution, rebellion, not maybe exactly the same thing, but is Revolution Calling a song of rebellion? In the narrative, right? He's going to tie in with this Dr. X, the man with the cure, and he's going to get screwed over by him.
Yeah.
But he's joining a movement of what seems to be rebels.
But at this point, he doesn't know he's going to get screwed over.
That's right. He's hopeful. He's hopeful and pissed off, right? He's like, I'm tired of all the bullshit they keep selling me on TV about the communist plan. I used to think only America's way was right, but now the holy dollar rules everybody's life. And then the chorus is revolution calling you. There's a revolution calling, got to make a change, got to push it on through. Okay, so that sounds pretty active.
Active, yeah.
Is that a revolution song? What do you think? Or not a revolution, a rebellion song?
Well, yeah. I mean, in it we have specifics of what's disagreed about.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, so this is different than the past tunes, which were simply, well, what do you mean you're rebelling? Well, I'm going to drive around in a truck, or I'm going to, this is more of a well, revolution. Now we've moved into, instead of me, it's a big cause. It's a little more political. It's more specific, but it starts off the story somebody that's angry that somebody's going to join some kind of cause because they're angry, and the goal is to make a choice. And it's not, revolutions are usually not pretty.
Yeah. So Rob says the difference between revolution and rebellion, one of perspective. And then Ken says maybe every revolution is a rebellion, but not every rebellion involves revolution. Yeah, because
that's true.
Revolutions transform things, right? I mean, if they're not successful, they're just a revolt. If they don't somehow
right
modify the situation that you're in.
And it's very different, rebelling against your parents by sneaking out the window to go smoke butts with your friend, and
as opposed to taking over the household yourself, right? Seizing the finances. Yeah, that would be a revolution.
Or the government, little different.
Yeah. So here's one to consider. Is Alice Cooper Schools Out a song of rebellion? I mean, it's certainly rebellious, and it got turned into a kind of, as he says, like an anthem for the end of school. He actually said something really kind of funny about it, which is, when we did Schools Out, I knew we had just done the national anthem. I'd become the Francis Scott Key of the last day of school. And then he said, it's amazing how everyone relates to that song, and mostly the teachers. The teachers are so sick of the kids at that point. So maybe like in 72, when he came out with it, the teachers are these much more repressive types. And I mean, we played it when we left the parking lot,
That's right.
every 80, 85, 86, but now we have teachers that grew up on that, and maybe they're like, yeah, I can't wait to get these damn kids out of my hair and have a summer to myself.
Yeah.
Actually, Rob, what do you think about that? You're a professor, is that something maybe you would play when they leave your class?
Well, it depends if he's an adjunct or not.
Rob says every effing year. Yeah. So another one that we were going to look at, Judas Priest's Parental Guidance. And this gets us into the heart of the counter response to heavy metal rebellion. Parental Guidance is directly aimed at the PMRC, which those who don't know, who are watching, this was a group that was sort of a watchdog group and had a lot of political clout behind it. Tipper Gore was in it, a few other big politicians' wives, and they got to start, congressional hearings on heavy metal that Dee Snider showed up for, and spoke very eloquently at. So, the Parental Guidance song is saying we don't need no parental guidance here, and it's very much about music. Every day you scream at me to turn the music low. If you keep on screaming, you'll make me deaf. You chew me out because I stay out late until your 3-piece suit comes back in date. Get one thing straight, and it's is there real rebellion here? Or is it just pushback? I think it's maybe not real rebellion, like breaking the law, but just kind of criticism. Ozzy Osbourne too was great at having songs where he's like essentially whining about how misunderstood he is, right, but there's no agency there.
The problem with Parental Guidance, when it came out, it was undermined by how corny the song itself was. I
Okay.
mean,
Well, that's interesting. So
it wasn't like a great metal riff. It was just kind of this. It sounded like this chorus they just threw together, like they were singing to some commercial or something. I remember when they came out, like we all were just like,
oh,
"Oh God, this is terrible."
yeah. So this is one that we didn't think about. Rob is pointing, or Ken is pointing out, metal churches start the fire, rebellion by the younger generation against the older generation.
That's
That's
perfect.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, that was an album where Judas Priest probably lost some of their street cred,
With
Turbo
parental
for a
guidance.
while. Yeah. Well, and some of the songs were a bit
Yeah,
it was not their strongest album.
but that
It,
was on
it's
the
it's grown
radio.
on people.
I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
but I remember every time it came on, it was just like I'm not a Priest fan anymore. It was a tough song to hear, and I thought it was just kind of like you guys, like they're not in it anymore. Sure, you're saying no parental guidance, but it's not. This isn't metal, and
Yeah.
I don't believe you.
So switching back to the PMRC, one of the things that was kind of interesting about that was that they were trying to claim, or at least some of the experts were trying to claim, that rebellion was right at the heart of metal. And I think they were mixing up rebellion with rebelliousness. Um, because
Yeah.
one of these, they actually had a music professor, Joe Stussy, who testified that the songs were focused on, and he had a whole bunch of things: rebellion, violence, substance abuse, perversion, S&M, Satanism. And this is what led to the PMRC having their Filthy 15. And it's interesting because I looked these up the other day. So of the Filthy 15, 9 of them are metal songs. Judas Priest, Eat Me Alive, Motley Crue's Bastard, AC/DC, Let Me Put My Love Into You, Twisted Sister, We're Not Going to Take It,
Mhm.
Wasps, Animal, Fuck Like a Beast, Def Leppard. Now, this is Def Leppard's High and Dry
Wow.
Saturday Night for drug use, Merciful Fates, Into the Coven, Black Sabbath's Trashed, and Venom's Possessed. And then they had like categories, and you could have several categories. One of them managed to get like 3 different categories: sex, violence, language, drug, alcohol use, and occult. Rebellion was not one of their categories in there. I'll also mention, too, that of the other 6 in the Filthy 15, other than Prince, all the rest of them are female artists, which might show a kind of misogyny and desire to control. All of them are sexy songs, Madonna. I'm blanking on the name of the woman who was very closely associated with Prince. She got in there as
Oh,
well.
Wendy.
I think so. And then like Cindy Lauper's She Bop was in there, you know.
Well,
But
what's weird? That they would bring a music professor in. That's why. What does a music professor
well,
do?
it establishes a certain kind of credibility.
No,
And
absolutely not. I mean,
well, not for us, but for the general public, right? You've got a professor, it's an expert witness.
yeah, but wouldn't you get a linguist expert, or wouldn't you get like something to do with the lyric content? You're not having somebody analyze the chord progressions or talk about the melodies, and that's where a musician or a music professor would come in. If you're dealing with the content of the tune, you know,
Yeah.
and especially a music professor, are they an expert on this kind of music? I mean, there's so much wrong with that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's almost like this is a whole non-starter now.
Yeah, I mean, for us, yes. I think for if you're trying to just like put on a show, I think it works. Robert Walzer, whose book I brought up, he did an analysis himself to see if this guy's claims were valid, and he actually said these themes are kind of uncommon. Another psychologist analyzed lyrics from 115 metal songs and found that the top 3 messages were, in fact, about violence, angst, and protest, but not rebellion as such. So it's interesting that they use the specter of rebellion. Your kids are going to turn into rebels. I mean, or they're going to turn into devil worshippers, which I guess is pretty close. And if you think about Rivera's Geraldo Rivera's expose, and that was in what, like 87,
Yeah.
86, 87. That's all he hammered on, is your kids are going to turn into a bunch of like, um, dangerous serial killer types because of listening to this awful music. It's hard to believe that he put it across with a straight face. Now, Ken brings up Megadeth, and we do have one Megadeth song in the mix. They've always been a very political band, though possibly more commentary and criticism than rebellion. I think peace sells, who's dying, or peace sells, but who's buying? I almost said who's dying. I want to say that's a song of rebellion, but it's a song of rebellion within limits. It's set up in such a way that it's, what do you mean X? I fulfill this condition. What do you mean I don't believe in God? I talk to him every day. What do you mean I don't support your system? I go to court when I have to. So I'm being rebellious, but I'm being rebellious within the limits. What do you mean I don't pay my bills? Why do you think I'm broke? And then I love this line: if there's a new way, I'll be the first in line, but it better work this time. I think that is inherently a political statement. It's not just about economics. It's not just about, culture. It's saying, listen, I'm cool with trying something new, but quit bullshitting me around about how it's going to be so great when clearly that's not the case. So it is a rebellious song, but it's also a rebellious song that's like holding people accountable, which I think is very different. It's one thing to be like, I'm going to throw a brick in your window and kick your teeth in because I don't like, the economy that I'm in. It's another thing to say, listen, I'll put up with some of your bullshit, but I'm not putting up with all of it. And I want to see some response on your part. I think that's what's going on. So Ken says that could definitely be considered to be actively rebellious as opposed to being commentary. Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes sense. I mean, some of Megadeth songs are also, they're aggressive, they're rebellious, but they're not rebellious against an authority. They're more like, you let me down. I don't like you,
Yeah, I mean, when you get things like the Queen's with the Operation Mindcrime, and this, we're getting to a little more thought provoking. This it's less of a chant or that kind of thing. Like where or an anthem. That's the word I'm looking for.
Okay, yeah.
Less of an anthem, but like, you really have to kind of dig in and read a little more than like when I said before, it's like, I remember the chorus and that was good enough for me,
Yeah. Here's another one to think about. A lot of people brought up Wasps' I Want to Be Somebody. Is that really a rebellion song? Or is it a song about wanting to be on the top? The verse, you say you don't want to starve or take the table crumbs that fall. You don't want to beg and plead at all. You don't want no 9 to 5, your fingers to the bone. You don't want the rock piles, bloody stones. But then it's, you got to be up high where the whole world's watching me because I got the guts to be somebody. I want to be somebody soon. I want to be somebody too. And then what does that look like? I want shiny cars and dirty money, lots of rock and roll. I'll live in fame and die in flames. I'm never getting old. So this totally imaginary hedonistic lifestyle. I don't know that that's rebellion. It's more like, I want to get mine, Jack,
It's, I mean, to boil it down, it sounds like wishing. Somebody's like, daydreaming about their life being,
So it's fantasy fulfillment.
It's fantasy fulfillment because there's no action involved. We know what you want, but how are you going to get it is our first thing. And then you can, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go burn down the church down the road. That's what I'm going to do. Or I'm going to go,
okay, so Ken says I describe it more as ambition rather than rebellion, and you could in fact fulfill that ambition without rebelling against anything. You get your record deal, and you go on your tours and sing your songs and stuff like that. Now here's something interesting from Rob. If a song or album is a sustained, highly cognitive critique and call to action, still rebellion, or does it cease being rebellion at a certain level of sophistication?
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking about before, because rebellion on the surface, doesn't it sound just like kind of
So he says, is Marx's Communist Manifesto rebellion lit? Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, if we're talking musically, it would have to be something like a concept album, right? And the closest thing that we come to that is maybe Queensryche's Operation Mindcrime,
Right.
where it turns out that he's been totally suckered, and the rebellion is just part of the same basic structure, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of a pessimistic take on it, isn't it?
Well, that's interesting about Marx.
Yeah. So we and by this I mean Andy and I saw Rage Against the Machine at Alpine Valley just last Saturday. And it was very striking because, Rage Against the Machine, you think, okay, a genre metal band. And the guitarist is doing some weird stuff on his guitar all the time. And all their songs are basically about, criticizing authority. Sometimes it's about the police, sometimes it's about economic structures. There's also that song where the chorus is, F you, I won't do what you tell me. That's pretty rebellious. And Rage Against the Machine is not very rebellious as Rage Against the Machine. I mean, for one thing, zero engagement with the audience whatsoever. A huge crowd of, like, I don't know, maybe 20,000 people. And the only thing the singer said to acknowledge the presence of the audience, he looked out and he's like, oh shit, and zero like talking back and forth. Just lots and lots of songs with slogans. And then they would put stuff up on this really cool screen behind them, some images where somebody's, oppressed and somebody's a police person. And then there'll be like a slogan, but you're like, this is just pure commodity.
Well, that's it. Yeah. I was just going to say the same thing. We don't believe you. I think that's like, it's kind of like when somebody, it's kind of like, if you're not like engaging with the crowd, like, this is, you've come to hear this message, or we're going to share this, then it becomes a commodity.
Yeah. Ken says it's commercial rather than authentic. Yeah. I mean, and
we don't believe you. Yeah.
And they're making tons and tons of money off of, this Get Back Together tour. Because they hadn't played together for a while. And this was, by the way, the beginning of their tour. So if there was any place where you'd think they'd be like creating a we with engagement with the audience, that would be the place. But just didn't happen at all, And this leads to a good sort of thing to wrap up. Is it possible to remain rebellious over time, or is this something by its nature that's not lasting? I started, talking about back in the late 80s, Van Halen, saying, we're going to stop the concert if you don't stop tearing up the grass here. And then people were like, that's not metal, man. That's not rock and roll. You've sold out,
Yeah.
And obviously it's kind of funny. What would David Lee Roth have done if he was there? Would he have been like, tear it up, party? Sammy Hagar was a little bit more mature and responsible.
I mean, like I was going to say, the Somewhere in Time tour, there were signs all over from Maiden, and they said, don't destroy the stuff or we can't come back and play, which is different, right?
Yeah.
That's different because it's like, we want to come and rock for you, but they won't let us come back and rock if you destroy everything, rather than, we're going to stop the show if you don't stop throwing chairs around,
Yeah.
You will see, Bruce Dickinson yell at people at shows, which I think is hysterical. There's people smoking pot in front of him, and he laid into them because he has to take drug tests to fly.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And,
I mean, that kind of makes sense, right?
It does. Yeah. But anyways, I didn't mean to totally go off, but.
So Rob says all rebels need a they. Yeah. So they need somebody to push against. Ken says, I think historically rebellions have either been successful or have been crushed. And so if the rebels are successful, can they keep rebelling? At a certain point, some of these songs, right? You're like, well, I don't know. You're a multimillionaire. I
Well, that's
don't,
it.
and you're 70 years old. I don't know that you're really a rebel anymore. So it's a good thing to
Well, that comes
ponder.
that comes you have to relate to the artist.
Okay.
I agree with that. Like if if you're it's harder to take a multi-million dollar artist singing about inequality, like as a rebellion kind of thing.
Yeah,
Rather than maybe
so
some.
great example when Skid Row, who don't even have Sebastian Bach anymore, sing "Youth Gone Wild," which was big when they were youth
Yep.
in '89. But now it's 2022. They're not really. I mean, talk about the youth gone wild. What youth are they talking about?
It's always Sebastian Bach sang it, in first person too, like or as a we, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, but in your 50s, can you still say that? Or people change from age 18 to 50 as far as their values, and hopefully over time we don't still have our same views as when we were 18 to some
I
degree.
mean, looking at myself, thank God, because
Yeah, same.
I was pretty stupid back then.
Yeah, I mean, there is something to be said about that it's a topic for another um discussion, I think. But you know is it right that the content changes as the bands get older? Is it appropriate, or are you just gonna you want the same album as from when they wrote when they were 21 at 57, or
Yeah. I think a great example of this with some significant contrast, right? So Judas Priest Turbo and Iron Maiden Somewhere in Time both get criticized by metal fans at the time for using too many synths, right? Too much keyboard, too much guitar synths, stuff like that. But musically, what's going on, it's just kind of more of the same for Judas Priest on that album, lyrically at least. Somewhere in Time is you know the loneliness of the long distance runner. You wouldn't have heard that on Peace of Mind or Number of the Beast, let alone Iron Maiden, right? So
Right.
there's some significant evolution taking place conceptually, lyrically, as opposed to just musically in that the getting older, not growing old, but getting older,
Yeah.
getting a bit more mature.
Yeah. Yeah. And it comes down to, do you want the same album being made, or do it's like, I
Oh
always
yeah,
defend,
yeah.
I always defend Robert Plant. He can't sing that stuff anymore. He can't sing the old Zeppelin stuff anymore. And what he's doing now fits his voice and fits his age. And he's writing about stuff. He's like, look, I was a crazy 21-year-old, and like I had no boundaries, and I didn't know a lot about life, and that's what you got. That was an
Yeah,
authentic
yeah.
performance. He's if even if he had the pipes out, that's not an authentic performance. I don't know. That's a whole other debate.
Well, this is a good place to close this up. We're so glad that we could be joined. Thanks, Scott, for joining us, but also Mark and Rob and Ken bringing a lot of expertise and some great questions. It looks like this new platform, although it has a few glitches, is probably what we're going to stick with.
Yeah, I like it.
So, yeah. We don't have a topic picked yet for next time, but we'll kick around some ideas. So thanks to everybody, and really glad that all of you could join us for this.
Take care.